My name is John Gant. I am president of ICCF. As many of you know, ICCF acts like a secretariat to the second largest caucus on Capitol Hill, the U.S. Congressional International Conservation Caucus. And we work to advance U.S. leadership in international conservation through public-private partnerships. And we attempt to educate the next generation of conservation leaders, both traditional and non-traditional, in the U.S. Congress. So it's a pleasure to be in front of you all today. We have two of our more illustrious partners and long-term partners with us here to talk about a increasingly more and more important discussion topic. And that's really how business can work with government, how it can work with NGOs to help with the natural resource management challenges of the 21st century. And I think there's really no better partnership than the Dow TNC partnership. The Nature Conservancy has been it's the world's largest conservation organization, as many of you know. It's been a partner of ICCF since the very beginning in 2002, and we've done a lot of great programs together. And I've always been very impressed by the Nature Conservancy's commitment to work with business, even if it's not the most popular among all their supporters. I recently watched a video that was sent to me by their CEO, Mark Tursick, who was, I think, was it Good Morning America? CBS, in which he really articulated the business case for conservation and the importance of working with the business community to solve these global challenges. And the business community obviously has the big footprints, and so the idea is to bring people into the tent that want to work on these issues and move forward. So it's a pleasure to be talking about these issues today, and I'd like to introduce now Glenn Prickett, who is the Chief External Affairs Officer of the Nature Conservancy. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here bright and early this morning. I think, John, this is one of the first breakfast briefings that ICCF has done, so hopefully we'll do a decent job and we can bring you back for other briefings. It's really a pleasure to be here today with my friend and colleague Peter Molinaro from the Dow Chemical Company. As John mentioned, we have we think, a unique and important partnership ongoing with the Dow Chemical Company. Really today, Peter is going to give the talk about the role of business in conservation. I'm going to set the scene talking about the importance of international conservation and really focusing on the importance of conservation to America's national interest. Given that we're sitting here in the Capitol building, that we're thinking about foreign policy, certainly this week, a very sober week to think about America's national interest. And of course, all of our thoughts are with the families of the fallen Foreign Service officers and their colleagues around the Middle East region and around the world. And it really, to us at the Nature Conservancy, gives added importance to the work we're doing with colleagues at ICCF and other NGOs, Vanessa Dick from World Wildlife Fund here today, Justin Ward from Conservation International, along with the Wildlife Conservation Society. Our 5 NGOs are working very closely together around the world, but especially here in Washington, to talk about the importance of international conservation to America's national interest and American foreign policy. So I'm going to cover that issue to set the scene, and then I'll introduce Peter to really talk about what's unique here this morning, and that's the increasing importance that the business community is putting on these issues. So to start the conversation, consider this. Last year, the UN population program predicted that from a population of 7 billion as of last year, the world may reach 9 billion in 2050 and potentially as much as 10 billion by the end of the century. Significant growth. Some question whether that growth will actually materialize because of this curve, the resource constraints that we will face as the population grows. What this chart shows is consumption of energy on this axis plotted against national income, GDP per capita, on this axis. And what you see is statistically, as national income rises, resource demand, here as exemplified by energy demand, increases exponentially. And as the World Bank and other authorities look at the decades ahead, They project that to accommodate that growing population, and we all hope rising living standards in the developing world in particular, we may need to increase food production by 70% to as much as 100%. We may need to double energy production and significantly increase our demand for other natural resources, which is going to present a significant constraint, and I'll touch on that briefly. But the bottom line is, without careful management of that natural resource base to allow that increased growth and productivity, all of this could end badly. Let's start with water, symbolized here on this diagram. Earlier this year, the National Intelligence Council issued an intelligence community assessment on behalf of the U.S. federal government looking at global water security. And I'll just read a couple of the key lines from that. During the next 10 years, many countries important to the United States will experience water problems, shortages, poor water quality, or floods that will risk instability and state failure, increase regional tensions, and distract them from working with the United States on important U.S. policy objectives. Between now and 2040, freshwater availability will not keep up with demand, absent more effective management of water resources, and water problems will hinder the ability of key countries to produce food and generate energy, posing a risk to global food markets and hobbling economic growth. So the issues around water alone are particularly significant. But water is not the only issue that we'll face regarding natural resource scarcity. Food production, which we tend not to think much about. We take availability of food for granted here in this country and many countries around the world. But that too is going to be increasingly challenged in the coming years by natural resource constraints. The increase in farm productivity is only just keeping up with the rate of population growth now, and that increase in productivity has slowed significantly since the Green Revolution boosted it in the 1970s. And if we are to produce 70 to 100% more food, we'll either need to expand production into a lot more arable land or dramatically boost that agricultural productivity, which will be challenging. In either case, it's going to require much more attention to how we manage fragile soils and scarce water supplies and healthy natural systems that nourish the soil and provide natural ways to deal with pests and enhance soil fertility. So natural resource management will be critical to feeding the population. And lastly, touch on the issue of the changes we're experiencing in the global climate. Now we're beginning to see that extreme weather events, droughts, floods, famine, storms, increasing in intensity more than scientists had expected. So in the coming years, we will see the impact of changes in the climate affecting all of us, but particularly the poor in the developing world. The World Bank did an assessment of what it would take to adapt to the changes we're seeing in climate, and they estimate that it'll cost between $70 to $100 billion per year between now and 2050 to help developing countries adapt to changes in climate change. And a lot of that will go toward improved natural resource management, which is an effective way to adapt to climate change. So the challenges to the world and to our national interests are significant. We see that across these issues and these various studies. The good news is that world leaders are waking up to the challenge. It's not just environmental organizations like the Nature Conservancy that are talking about this anymore. This is a photo from an event that the Nature Conservancy hosted earlier this summer at the Rio Plus 20 conference in June. Rio Plus 20 didn't get a lot of attention in the media. There were no big treaties signed or big global initiatives launched. But it was a very important convention because leaders like some of the ones pictured here, you see from the center moving out, President Yudhoyono of Indonesia, Prime Minister Gillard of Australia, the Prime Ministers of Antigua Barbuda and Grenada and the Seychelles, the Environment Minister from Colombia. These leaders and others came to the conference to make very significant commitments about how they would manage their natural systems, their oceans, their rivers, their forests, their wetlands better, not just because those areas are important for nature and for biodiversity, which groups like the Nature Conservancy care about, but because those natural systems, those rivers, those coasts, those forests, are vital for their sustainable economic development. So the idea that nature has value to the economic development of countries all around the world was one of the big ideas, the big themes that came out of the Rio Plus 20 conference. And we saw very significant commitments from these leaders and others, and importantly from a considerable number of companies who also came to Rio to make those commitments. So the good news is the world is waking up to the natural resource challenges, and there are things that we can do to address them. What I want to talk about for the balance of my time here is very concretely how the United States can help, not just in our own country and our own society, but around the world, to address some of these challenges that the solutions to which are very much in our national interest. As hopefully many of you in this room know from having attended ICCF briefings in the past and working on these issues, the United States has been an important provider of assistance through our foreign assistance programs for conservation and natural resource management, going back close to 40 years now, certainly over 30 years. This has been a bipartisan tradition. In my own experience, it's been a priority for 6 presidents, 3 Democratic, 3 Republican. It's authorized in the Foreign Assistance Act as one of the priorities of our foreign assistance program. It supports other U.S. foreign policy goals, security, health, food security, and so on. And it is carried out by a number of important agencies in our government. Of course, the U.S. Agency for International Development being the most significant with the largest program, currently about $200 million each year, programmed in development assistance by USAID. But other important programs in the U.S. government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, at the U.S. Forest Service, and we're a contributor to important international programs like the Global Environment Facility, managed by the World Bank and the UN Development Program and Environment Program. Just looking at the trends, you see how the importance of conservation in our foreign aid budget has grown, starting back in the mid-1990s. Under successive presidents and administrations, we've seen an increase in the assistance we're providing to deal with some of these important natural resource management challenges. It's leveled off now at $200 million, reflecting the budget challenges the government faces overall. But these are critical programs that we all need to work to maintain and make stronger. I'm going to touch on a few examples of how these programs are effectively addressing the issues I talked about earlier: food, water, the challenge of climate change, and security. Let's start with food. One of the longer running programs and more successful programs in these areas has been in the country of Niger. After the great drought in the Sahel in 1985, USAID started what became a 20-year program to restore the forest and regreen the Sahel. And you see here some of the results of that. What restoring the forest was able to do was boost family incomes and agricultural productivity, helping to boost their incomes and ensure food security for those poor communities. So this is probably one of our best examples of how effective natural resource management, forest restoration in this case, can not only protect the environment, but boost food security, improve family livelihood, and help to reduce poverty. Still thinking about food, on the other side of the world, a more recent program. You saw an image of President Yudhoyono earlier. He and the leaders of 5 other nations in Southeast Asia have come together with support from USAID, the Global Environment Facility, our organizations, World Wildlife Fund, Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, in something called the Coral Triangle Initiative, which is looking at how do those nations improve management of their coastlines across this 3 million square mile area to essentially promote food security. Fisheries there are a source of food and income for more than 130 million people. So it's a strategic issue, and that's what President Yudhoyono was talking about in the event we held at Rio. His commitment and his recommitment to the goals of that Coral Triangle Initiative to manage coastlines and fisheries sustainably for the food security of his people. Moving to the water issue, we talked about the strategic importance of water in the years ahead. AID, the Global Environment Facility, the Nature Conservancy, and FEMSA, the Latin American bottling arm of Coca-Cola and other beverages, are now working with 30 cities across Latin America to look at how forests and other natural habitat upstream from those cities provides natural infrastructure, helps to provide reliable supplies of clean water that will provide for over 50 million people in those cities in the coming years. We're doing this through some innovative financing that we call water funds, where large users of water, like hydroelectric companies, water companies, bottling companies like FEMSA, are paying into funds that support forest restoration and better farm management upriver, so that poor farmers in the watersheds of those cities become water producers as well as agricultural producers. This has been a program that's grown rapidly with a very small grant, $21,000 from USAID in Quito a little over 10 years ago. That Quito fund is now at $10 million. As you see, we're working in 30 cities, and our partners alone have committed $27 million to this program. just a couple more examples before I wrap up. Sorry, I didn't miss the advance on the slides. We talked about the impact of climate change. This is a story that not a lot of people know about the effectiveness of our assistance program over the years. Brazil and Indonesia are two of the more important countries on the climate change issue because of the importance of how lands are managed to climate. 30% of greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change, deforestation, and agriculture. Much of that happens in Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, and a few other countries. The United States has been working with these countries for over 20 years on effective forest management programs for setting up protected areas, improving management of forestry, improving management of livestock. So much so that Brazil has been able to reverse the trend of deforestation that had been such a problem in the Amazon and other rainforests in Brazil. And they are now proudly reducing deforestation and have a national policy that effectively is growing their economy, growing their agricultural and rural economies while reducing deforestation. Similar initiatives are underway in Indonesia and in Mexico. And U.S. assistance has been a big part of the success, again, over successive administrations and Congresses. American business benefits directly from these programs. We've had briefings at ICCF before where the American forestry industry has talked about the threat of illegal logging to their business, which costs them over $1 billion a year. So these programs help to address a competitive threat to good American business. And more recently, large U.S. food and retail companies are actively looking for sustainable sources of things like beef and oil palm and soybeans, and our programs are helping countries like Brazil and Indonesia to provide that sustainable supply chain for American business. Lastly, I'll touch on the security issues that are so much on our minds. The events this week show us that it's still a dangerous and unstable world. One of the regions of particular concern to the United States is northern and eastern Africa. We've been working in Kenya, in northern Kenya, an area of some instability, to improve grassland management with pastoral communities there for better livestock management and better conservation of wildlife. And after 6 years, we see incomes increasing, food security, health, education improving. And most interestingly, that program has sworn in local police reserves as reserve guards to protect the rangelands, and they're helping to improve the security situation in the area and reduce rural violence that could escalate and become a bigger problem for that country and for our interests. So I just want to close and wanted to point out that there is a piece of legislation that's been introduced this year, reintroduced by a bipartisan group of co-sponsors, Senators Udall and Portman in the Senate, Representatives Fortenberry and Carnahan in the House. And this bill addresses that issue and really attempts to call on the administration to create a more focused strategy for how we can use these effective natural resource programs to address crucial national interests. So I'll close on that just to show you that this is a matter of importance to the country, a matter of interest to the Congress now, and something that the Nature Conservancy and the other organizations will be working on with companies like Dow and agencies such as the ones I've described in the years ahead. So with that, it's a pleasure to introduce Peter Molinaro. Peter is the Vice President for North American Government Affairs at the Dow Chemical Company, and he'll talk about the importance of these issues to the business community.
Thank you. Thanks, Glenn. Good morning. I want to say that to start off, the Dow is 115 years old this year, and I will have to tell you also that it is not easy to be a 115-year-old chemical company, right? The practices of 100 years ago are still although long gone from a practice point of view, do remain in some respects legacies that companies like ours have to manage. And the costs of managing what at the time were seen as good environmental practices, using the land in some respects as to take on the waste of our productive processes, still costs money today to manage and to overcome. So one doesn't need to go much further than that to say what's a better use of the money, to fund your R&D pipeline or to clean up for past mistakes or past operating practices. So I think it's fair to say that going forward, if we want to be having this conversation in another 115 years, the point is that we're going to have to make a dramatic change to accommodate the kinds of context that Glenn talked about in terms of world population and resource demands. I think they're eminently solvable as long as each player in the world economy plays their part. And in this case, it's the part of the business community to actually value nature for its opportunity to create business value for us, as opposed to being used as it was in the past. Let me just give you a sense of what our journey has been. Hey, it worked. In the last, since about 1995, we've set goals for sustainability. And in the early days of this journey, we sort of set typical goals that you might imagine. We're gonna emit fewer emissions to the air. We're gonna create less waste. We're gonna have fewer injuries on the work site. And we always sort of half-jokingly say, we're gonna do less bad. And then as we got around to coming up with our 2015 goals, we have a corporate environmental advisory panel. And we took our second round of goals to them, which were, we're going to do even less bad. Okay, we're going to reduce air emissions even more. We're going to create even less waste, and we're going to have even fewer, workplace incidents. And the corporate environmental advisory panel of, sort of NGO leaders and economists from around the world, conservationists said, I don't think so. What if you imagine going and talking to the world's how would you sell your program to the world's oldest woman, a seventh generation child, and a dolphin? Now that, for a bunch of engineers was an interesting question. And so we went back and we said, well, what if instead of doing all this less bad, we would do more good? And so we focused on the idea of sustainability as a way of solving world problems. And that became a much loftier objective and something to really organize ourselves around. So if you look at our mission, our vision, our corporate strategy, and our values, we've sort of suffused that with these notions of sustainability. Our mission includes, recently, passionately innovate what is essential to human progress by providing sustainable solutions to our customers. Vision, to be the most profitable and respected science-driven chemical company in the world. If you're trying to recruit on college campuses, you had better be a respected company, and you had better be interested in solving world problems, because the competition, as some of you who follow the world of STEM education, we are short very talented engineering and science people, and if we want to recruit the best and brightest, we've got to give them a reason to want to come and work for us. Creating value for our shareholders, but we also have as our values 3: integrity, respect for people, and protecting the planet. And that really now, this is all part of the DNA code for Dow. So when you think about, is sustainability a little program in an office on the 3rd floor of the headquarters building? No. It is part and parcel of the entire way we think about what we're going to be doing as a company, and how we select leaders, and how we do business strategy, and where we invest, and how we choose to innovate. When we announced our collaboration, and we're not going to go into depth about our collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, although if somebody wanted to ask a question, I'm sure Glenn and I could probably talk about that a little bit. But our CEO, Andrew Liveris, said there's no longer a choice between economic growth and ecological conservation. They're interdependent. Protecting nature can be a profitable corporate priority and a smart global business strategy. I also like this one. The Pavan Sukhdev. We use nature because it's valuable, but we lose nature because it's free. I'll give you an example. We own water rights on the Brazos River in Texas, and we're sort of at the end of it. Our largest plant, the plant that is really part of this Nature Conservancy project, uses 100,000 gallons of water a minute. But because water is inexpensive even though you have water rights, you don't necessarily have the water, and especially when you have a drought, you don't have access to water. So you have to think about how you value that resource much differently. So, as with anything else, we try to think about the business risks and opportunities in dealing with nature. So, what are the operational risks? For example, increased scarcity and cost of inputs. If we waste energy, and the United States, unfortunately, is pretty low down the scale in terms of its efficient use of energy. We happen to have some greater abundance than we used to have, but it shouldn't mean that we now have, energy to burn, so to speak. And so if you looked at some of the scarcity of resources in the last decade, investment decisions to invest in other parts of the world where energy was more plentiful and cheaper were made, and it cost a lot of manufacturing jobs in the United States. But if we can improve resource efficiency and put these resources to good use, we can reinvest here, and we are. The reputational damage of not valuing nature properly is significant. Companies have gone away as a result of it. But as I say, doing it right gives you a differentiated brand. We are recruiting on college campuses. I mean, I was a student of the 70s in colleges, and I would say that there are campuses today that we're very successfully recruiting from that you would not have imagined us being able to recruit from in the 1970s. New products, customer preferences are changed by their views about your company and about the environment. So we're looking at, for example, if you have a wind turbine, and there's a lot of oil in the turbine housing, well, what happens if that breaks and leaks on the ground in West Virginia? Well, it would be better to have a natural oil-based lubricant than to have a hydrocarbon, a petroleum-based lubricant. Those little decisions that go into our thinking now because of the consequence of the wrong type of behavior happening. And then there's also always the financial benefits. As I said, you look at your budget, you can look at our 10K and find out how much we spend on remediation. You could say, well, what if I didn't have to spend that on remediation and could spend it on the new product development pipeline. And I also mentioned, down there, recruitment. As I said earlier, people want to come to work for a company that wants to solve world problems. So let's take a look at some of this conventional wisdom versus ecosystem wisdom, if you want to use that term. Think about, we're at 7 years since Katrina. And there were a lot of gray infrastructure solutions designed to protect New Orleans from storm surge and flooding. And we all know that didn't work out so well. And that every year they lose in the marshlands, I think 40,000 acres, some tremendous amount of buffer. It's sort of, somebody called it the speed bump for storm surge. And I think the cost of dealing with the infrastructure and damage issues in that area was like $110 billion. But for a whole lot less, had we spent some time focusing on restoring that marshland, we would have had a better buffer. I remember previously working for another company. In the 1990s, we were approached by the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Excuse me. And they said, well, instead of discharging your treated wastewater back into the Mississippi River, which the water would actually be cleaner than the river it's going into, why don't you discharge it into the wetland? And we have a real saltwater intrusion problem. It's costing us, marshland. And why don't you discharge it there and sort of recharge the aquifers with, fresher water? Plus, it'll have a natural filtration capacity. And at the time, this is in the early 1990s, that decision was way over-lawyered, as you might imagine. Chemical company discharges wastewater into wetland. How good an idea is that, right? So, but as I'll explain in a bit, cooler heads have prevailed over time. Another interesting example. How many of you like New York City Water? Oh, did I just screw up here? I pushed the wrong button. There we go. I always marvel at New York City Water. It kind of beats a lot of other waters in the taste tests, right? Well, they don't have gray infrastructure filtration for the New York City water system. This is the intake, the Catskill water intake for the New York City drinking water system, and their tap water doesn't pass through a filtration plant, and so it provides 90% of the area's water supply right by filtration through wetlands and the waterways. So they were going to spend about $6 billion on infrastructure to do treatment. Instead, they chose to restore the watershed. This is a case of green infrastructure that Glenn talks about. Another example is Clean Water Services. They had a requirement to reduce the temperature. When you discharge water at a higher temperature into a river, you can have an effect on the biota. And in this case, they worked on, instead of a $60 million cooling chiller system, dealing with planting trees and creating shade over the river to reduce the temperature of the effluent into the river. And again, a successful example at a greatly reduced cost. Another example is anybody here from the Great Lakes or anybody dealing with invasive species, the issue of ballast water. So pure ballast is an opportunity for product development, and this is not a Dow product, but water treatment system, sort of a natural treatment system to remove unwanted marine organisms from ballast water. So as you start looking more holistically at the nature as a resource, you start thinking about new ways and new product ideas to address that issue. These are 4 Dow plants. They're fairly typical of our size and scale. I guess I would say that our Freeport plant covers this whole wall, but that's an anomaly. So we chose to do our project at our largest, most complex plant, which either makes us crazy or visionary. I don't know which, but both. Well, Terneuzen in the Netherlands. This isn't really a. You can see how natural systems sort of surround us. We're mostly on water. It's either river water or ocean, and there's an awful lot of ecosystem around us that we have to be concerned about, and that we can either have as a cost or as a benefit. And our next project with the Nature Conservancy is going to be in Brazil. But if you think about it, this is not quite an apt example, but in Terneuzen, the Netherlands, we've chosen to substitute seawater for fresh water in cooling. That presents a whole lot of engineering challenges because of corrosion issues, but the fact that we have access to salt water does save a tremendous amount of fresh water. Pittsburgh, California has a wetland right alongside of our plant, and we have worked very closely with the community. And I would say that we're not deriving direct economic benefit from that restoration work, but whenever we go for a permit, that community is a lot more accepting of our activities because of the relationship that we have with nature in that community. And if you don't think that getting a permit on time matters, you haven't been in Congress very long, right? This is sort of the successor to the idea that I expressed early on. We had an enterprising plant manager in Seadrift, Texas, sort of near Victoria, Texas, for those of you with Texas geographic background. The idea was we would have to build a tertiary treatment plant to deal with our wastewater, and it was going to be about a $40 million proposition, again, gray infrastructure. The plant manager there took a great risk because, if you're an engineer, you really go with what works. You really want to go with, the big engineered project. He said, what if we built a wetland? and how can that be more useful. And we went ahead and we constructed a wetlands project alongside our existing wastewater ponds, so that these ponds then go into the wetland area. There's final filtration, recharging the aquifer, treating 5 million gallons of water a day, plus supplying habitat. So making active use of nature as part of our process for reducing our environmental footprint. So with that, I want to, whoops, did I go past one slide? I did. So valuing nature, again, is a strategic fit for Dow. Every business has a responsibility to manage this issue. Again, I said it's not by a program office in the company per se. So access to ecosystem services, we have to rely on abundant fresh water, and we have to make sure that it's there. Like I said, in Freeport, Texas, we were down to 15-day supply of water. You don't really want to run out of water at a chemical plant. I think something like 20–25% of our global production comes out of that plant. The other area is product alignment. So we have organized ourselves around megatrends, dealing with food, dealing with transportation and infrastructure, dealing with energy, and dealing with consumerism. And a lot of our R&D program is geared toward sustainable solutions in all of those areas, trying to take account of those basic megatrends. And the whole philosophy is, how do you do more with less? How do you make products that require less of an overall footprint, whether it be in terms of raw material, sustainability, or energy footprint, and the like. Trying to use green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure saves money and delivers environmental benefits, as I mentioned in the Seadrift case study. And then, we still practice conservation activities, but I have to say that really, in conclusion, that this is not about philanthropy. Okay, this is not about doing conservation because it's just good for your reputation. It really is a bottom line issue, and we are trying. And I have to say, in some of these cases, like in the collaboration with the Nature Conservancy, we don't know yet what we don't know about how to do this. I'm not here to say that there's a cookbook, and if every company picked it up on the way out, that we'd all, everything would be great. But what it does mean is that through collaboration with organizations like the Nature Conservancy and with government, we can find these solutions if we're willing to kind of take some of the blinders off and recognize the value of nature as a profit center as opposed to a cost. So with that, I'll stop, and then I think Glenn and I are available to answer questions.
And for all of you taking notes, we videotape all of these, and we'll have the PowerPoint slides on our website, and we'll be sending it around to you all in the next couple of days. Any questions?
One of Peter's slides mentioned a provision of the Clean Water Act that allows for trading of thermal credits, which I thought was really interesting. I was not aware that law contained a market-based mechanism. More details on that.
I think the Clean Water Act is really one of the more innovative statutes. There was also some desire to look at other trading, like, for example, in the Louisiana example that we didn't pursue, the idea was how to reduce total suspended solids. And so you could have built a $30–40 million project to get that last increment out of our plant, or wouldn't it have been better to go up and have us spend a fraction of that with some of the agricultural runoff issues upriver? So I don't think at the time the Clean Water Act permitted that, but this is sort of an innovation in the Clean Water Act. That's about all I know about that.
In the back.
What ended up happening in Louisiana with the saltwater intrusion project, where you're considering releasing wastewater?
That was in the early 1990s, and I think that idea was abandoned. I don't think we were reapproached about it. It's been a long time since I revisited that question, but we're pretty much focusing our efforts right now on this project in Seadrift, Texas, which is really a water project. So it would be interesting to look at and see whether that project in Louisiana was viable.
Okay, well, listen, before you all leave, I just want everybody to make sure they grab a copy of our ICCF Partners in Conservation booklet, which we write out doors, and it really showcases a lot of these great examples, Dow and TNC partnership being one of them, and all the good work they're doing. But one of the things it also does, from a congressional perspective, a U.S. government perspective, is really talks about how these conservation groups working with America's biggest and best and most well-known businesses help with American security and prosperity, and for other countries as well. So it talks about how these projects link to food security and global health, which is obviously one of the tenets of Dow's project, natural security, poverty alleviation, sustainable economic development, and water. So it really is a great reference book to really showcase and link the business community and the NGOs and public-private partnerships and all the good work that these businesses are doing to help with American interests here and abroad. So thank you so much for coming, and see you all very soon.
Thanks for setting it up. Appreciate doing it. Yep.
Thank you.